The assignment is to discuss whether income, gender, or racial inequality is a problem for business and society. I'm going to be focusing on race and how that plays into current day 2018 business and society and what we're seeing in our present time. So our textbook defines racism as the belief that each race has distinctive cultural characteristics and that one's own race is superior to the others. So we're all familiar with segregation, Jim Crow laws in the United States, the North and South Civil War, and the history of America has deeply impacted our current day views of race, racism in our society, and that also flows into how businesses are affected these days. So part of the discussion of why race is such an issue is looking back at the history. The history underlies issues that I think people in today's society don't necessarily contribute to why there are such clashes and conflicts with, let's say, like police brutality and racial injustice, and why there's protests and why there is change and why there is going backwards in our society. And for example, in 2018, a lot of social media helps to highlight some of the racial injustices and how it affects business, how it affects our society, and how it affects our way of thinking. So just in 2018, we've had several instances where racism has become a viral sensation. For example, we had Barbecue Becky, where a white woman called the cops on a black man because she didn't like the way he was barbecuing. And this is like in a public setting, a public place, and the cops are called because this white woman felt she had some say in how this black man's was doing his barbecue, how he was cooking, how he was using whatever, the public barbecue set. And the issue is that as a society, we should not be calling the cops on someone who is minding their own business, using a public barbecue in a park where there's other people around, where no one else has an issue, where this black man is not, interfering with anybody else's personal space, day. He was with his family, minding his own business. The problem is that this white woman felt it was justified to call the cops for such a problem that she felt she needed to have reinforcement and needed to have them come and say that this black person couldn't do this. So we also saw this in an example with another viral sensation that's called Permit Patty, where a white woman called the police on a young black child and her, I think it was mother, for selling water bottles, outside. She was trying to raise a couple bucks, she wanted tickets, I think, to an amusement park or something like that. And, back in the day as a child, you think, okay, you're a child, how do you learn business? How do you learn to make a couple bucks here and learn, those kind of, goals, and how to set a goal and how to achieve a goal? And, a lot of us did Girl Scouts, a lot did lemonade stands, a lot of us did, bake sales. And the fact that a white woman called the cops on a black young child, it just sets the tone that this young child feels like she can't go anywhere, can't do anything without a white person telling them that she's wrong. So those were two examples of viral sensations that had sparked a lot of conversation, and another one that had a bigger effect happened in a very, very popular store brand, well-known, multi-million-dollar business, and that's Starbucks. Starbucks, you know, opens its doors. It's a business. It's supposed to adhere to non-discrimination laws, ageism laws, whatever. You know, you're supposed to go in, be able to buy a coffee, sit down. You're supposed to be able to just go there to study, whatever. It's not a big deal. And a white manager called the cops on 2 black men who were waiting for their friend to come because they're a friend, but they're going to discuss, I think, some business deal, whatever. Anyways, they were meeting their friend who, after fact, it learns to be white. And the manager claims that these 2 men should be arrested, should not be allowed in the store because they were not paying customers. And the 2 men politely told the manager that they were waiting for their friend who was coming on his way to that Starbucks, and then they would order. And I think the manager used the excuse of, well, you're not supposed to use our bathrooms, they're only for, you know, paying customers. Okay, well, I've been to plenty of Starbucks without buying a coffee and using the bathrooms and whatever. And it just goes to show that because she didn't like the color of their skin, that she decided to call the cops, and they did get arrested after other customers who witnessed this whole situation, witnessed this white manager and stood up for these 2 men. After they vouched for him, you know, told them they didn't do anything wrong, they were just waiting. Their white friend showed up and said, what's going on? You know, they were waiting for me to come here. We were going to order then. What's the deal? They still got arrested. And this affected the business, Starbucks, because they actually ended up closing for a full day. Or I think it was an afternoon. I don't remember exactly what, but they used it as a learning opportunity of a race and, you know, how to better handle that kind of situation. And although it seems like a great idea, you know, this kind of racism isn't going to end in one afternoon after one conversation. And I don't recall hearing more how Starbucks has been handling that. But it affects the business because now people have been boycotting Starbucks. They've been, you know, they've heard this story on the news. They heard it, you know, what happened. And they feel like these 2 men were singled out racism, and they actively disagree with how Starbucks handled that. And it's 2018, and we think, how in the world do these stories keep happening? How do we, as a society, as, you know, a unit, how do we allow this to happen in the United States? And a lot of issues revolve around how people don't know how to maybe discuss race and don't know how to handle racism these days, but that's not an excuse, right? For example, like this week, Megyn Kelly on the Today Show discussed how she didn't think anything was wrong with blackface. And she is on a platform where you cannot do that. She has this white power where she announced to millions and millions of people how she thought there was nothing wrong with blackface, because back in her day, if you put blackface on, you're playing a costume, a character. And that whole statement is just completely wrong, because the whole history of blackface is you're representing a black person and the stereotypes, right? The stereotypes that they have accumulated over the years, and they're not characters. You're representing black people, but you're characterizing it and making fun of it, right? So it's just absolutely unacceptable that in 2018 Megyn Kelly went on air to millions of people and discussed how blackface was not a problem, how she thought blackface was not a problem. And that hurts the business. That has been hurting NBC because they have had to pull her 9 a.m. segment off the air. They're in negotiations about her contract. They have people boycotting NBC, you know, going to different news outlets because that's just not acceptable anymore. I think, unfortunately, racism is very much present. People like to think that racism is not around, and I think 2018 highlighted how very much so. It's less hidden, I think, these days, unfortunately. Well, I don't know if that's unfortunate, actually. It's better to know that someone is a racist than like trying to pretend that they're not and you're just finding out. But like, I think 2018 has showed much more of our society discussing racism, and I don't see it improving. I think that as a business, you need to address it head on. You can't skirt around it. You can't make up excuses. You can't allow it in your environment. And I think Starbucks, I don't think that manager, that white woman, is still employed at Starbucks. And I think Starbucks did the right decision to, you know, let that person go, or however they handled that situation. Like, you know, I think she got fired. But I think that's not quite enough because it's still happening, right? So the conversation needs to turn more to, why is this wrong? Why is it unacceptable? And how do we move forward as a society? How do we get past racism? And I think a lot of it is built into stereotypes, and stereotypes hurt racial groups. So Halloween is next week, and the problem is that stereotypes are still being used for costumes, right? So you have like Native Americans, Pocahontas. You still have people dressing up in, you know, blackface and afros and thinking that's funny. You have people pretending to, when you pretend to be a different race, that's a problem. I saw an article how a young child, a boy, I think he dressed up as Malcolm X for Halloween, or for his, you know, class costume day. And he's a white boy, but he dressed appropriately. He did not have any blackface on him, but you know, there was other distinctive things that he could have done. And you know, that's the proper way to do it. Okay, so I went to the University of Vermont for my undergrad, and Vermont is a predominantly white state. Actually, SNL did a very comical, you know, skit about how Vermont is so white and there was no black people. And I went to a school that was also predominantly white, and you know, I got into as a senior in high school, I got into UVM, and I had someone say to me like, oh, well, you got in because of the, you know, they needed that quota. They needed the non-white, they needed the Asian quota, the minority, that's the word. They needed that minority quota. And it's like, no, I got in because I'm in the National Honor Society. I have above a 3.5 grade point average. I have these scholarships. I've done these, you know, extracurricular activities. I've done these leadership positions. It's not because they needed another Asian and another Chinese student. And that's just offensive. And I think that even as a minority that does pretty well for itself, it's still that there's racism and that stereotypes that hurt our society. It hurts to say those things to somebody, and it hurts how we perceive other individuals and other races. Other races. So overall, I think it's unfortunate that in 2018 we still have the discussion of how it's not okay to be a racist. I think it's unfortunate that we have a conversation where minorities feel unsafe in America, and I feel like that's just so sad because it's not acceptable, and it is, as like a human being, it's horrible that that cops are being called on people for minding their own business and for living their lives and for doing things that, you know, they should not have been the police called on them. And I think that's truly, truly unfortunate.